Israel Keyes, January 7, 1978, December 2, 2012, was an American serial killer, bank robber, burglar, arsonist, kidnapper, and sex offender who murdered at least 3 victims and committed dozens of felonies, including armed robbery, arson, rape, and burglary across the United States from July 2001 to February 2012. While awaiting trial, Keyes killed himself by hanging and slashing his wrists. Evidence left behind in his jail cell, including a suicide note, drawings of 11 skulls, a drawing of the Baphomet, and an inscription of Corazal on the cell's wall, all written or otherwise stained with Keyes' blood, led the FBI to suspect Keyes murdered at least 11 victims in total. He admitted to having committed violent crimes as early as 1996 with the aggravated sexual assault of a teenage girl in Oregon, in a series of meticulous crimes across multiple states that lasted until his capture in 2012. Childhood Israel. Keyes was born on January 7, 1978 in Richmond, Utah, to Heidi Keyes, formerly Hawkinson, and John Jeffrey "Jeff" Keyes, October 4, 1952, November 13, 2002. He was the second child among 10 siblings, born into a large family whose parents were members of the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Torrance, California. In their early years, Keyes and his siblings received homeschooling and were instilled with Christian beliefs until 1983. Subsequently, after their departure from the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Keyes' father relocated the family to a remote piece of land in Stevens County, north of Colville, Washington, when Israel was just 5 years old. Isolated from mainstream society, the Keyes family resided in a single-room cabin along Rocky Creek Road, devoid of modern amenities such as electricity and running water. While living in Colville, the Keyes family attended services at a church known as the Ark, which adhered to white supremacist Christian identity ideology. Keyes later likened the atmosphere at the Ark to that of an Amish-like church. During this period of association with the Ark, the Keyes family became friends with the neighboring Kehoe family, particularly Chevy Kehoe, who would later be convicted for a triple murder that occurred in 1996. The family was associated with another church in Colville known as the Christian Israel Covenant Church. This church adhered to the doctrine of British Israelism, which propagated the belief that miscegenation was morally wrong and considered it deviant. Additionally, the church preached that Anglo-Saxons were destined to dominate what they perceived as inferior races. Keyes later claimed that the church had a militia-like atmosphere. Over the years, some of the Keyes children were forced to sleep in a tent because their cabin was too small. To make ends meet, the Keyes children were required to hunt for their food, chop firewood, and assist on local farms to support their family. As a personal interest, Keyes enjoyed hunting and would pursue anything with a heartbeat. He once admitted to his peers at the church that he had skinned a deer while it was still alive. This revelation led to Keyes being shunned and actively avoided by several young people who attended the Christian Israel Covenant Church. One girl even recalled that Keyes' presence made her feel extremely uncomfortable. During his youth, Keyes openly confessed to engaging in troubling activities. He admitted to using his BB gun to shoot at neighbors' homes, igniting fires in the woods, and unlawfully entering houses for amusement. He occasionally teamed up with another young individual for these activities, but this partnership dissolved when Keyes shot an animal, causing his accomplice to distance himself. Keyes even pilfered several firearms from a neighbor's house, leading to parental intervention and an apology. Furthermore, Keyes, who had already grown to a towering height of 6 feet 2 inches by age 14, sometimes sold stolen firearms to local adults. During this period, his parents provided shelter to personal friends. In a disturbing incident witnessed by Keyes' sister and their friends, he cruelly tethered a cat to a tree using a parachute cord and brutally harmed it with a .22 revolver. The cat, in distress, circled the tree before colliding with it and vomiting. Shockingly, Keyes reportedly chuckled during this ordeal and took note of a boy's vomit in response to the distressing situation. This event marked a turning point for Keyes, as he realized that he was alienated from his peers, who began to avoid him. Consequently, he started to conceal his increasingly antisocial behavior, withdrawing from social interactions due to the rejection he experienced. Additionally, Keyes's mother began noticing concerning signs in him during this period, particularly his fascination with tuning into various radio stations and different things. As Keyes entered his teenage years, he honed his carpentry skills and constructed his family's first wooden cabin at the age of 16. He also worked for a Colville contractor from 1995 to 1997. Throughout this time, he maintained a journal dating back to his early childhood, which contained Bible scriptures and documented his daily transgressions, causing him to feel deep shame, particularly for his lustful thoughts about his girlfriend. The family eventually relocated to Smyrna, Maine, where they engaged in maple syrup production within a predominantly Amish community. Due to their mother's fervent religious beliefs, the Keyes children were compelled to secretly break free from their parents' restrictions to watch movies with friends, and were forbidden from learning to play musical instruments, which were deemed against God. During this period, Keyes renounced his former Christian faith. At one point, a heated argument led Keyes to openly declare his atheism to his parents, both of whom he had previously strived tirelessly to please. This act of defiance resulted in his eviction from their home and their shunning of him for what they perceived as blasphemy. They also instructed Keyes's younger siblings, who had looked up to him, never to have any contact with him again. This experience triggered Keyes's deep fascination with Satanism and a disturbing desire to commit a ritualistic murder. Deschutes River Assault. In the summer of 1997 or 1998, Keyes allegedly committed a sexual assault on a teenage girl who had been tubing with her friends down the Deschutes River in Maupin, Oregon. Although this was not his first sexual assault, Keyes admitted that he stalked her from a tree line before very violently sexually assaulting the girl, whom he estimated to be between 14 and 18, by knife point. Originally planning to murder her as part of a satanic ritual, Keyes let her go in the river tube he had abducted her from. "I was too timid. I wasn't violent enough," he told investigators. "I made up my mind I was never going to let that happen again." Military service. On July 9, 1998, Keyes made a significant move, joining the United States Army in the state of New York. He served as a specialist in Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 5th Infantry Regiment. Keyes successfully completed a demanding month-long preliminary course for United States Army Rangers training and was stationed at both Fort Lewis and Fort Hood. He also had overseas assignments, one of which was in Sinai, Egypt, where he formed acquaintances with fellow soldiers, with one unsettlingly remarking that Keyes expressed a desire to harm him. While stationed at Fort Lewis, Keyes worked on a mortar team within the 1st Battalion, 5th Infantry, 25th Infantry Division. Those who served with him in the Army described him as reserved and often keeping to himself. On weekends, he was known for heavy drinking, frequently consuming entire bottles of his preferred beverage, Wild Turkey Bourbon. Keyes also displayed posters of the hip-hop duo Insane Clown Posse in his barracks, showing his fandom. In February 2001, Keyes faced legal trouble when he was arrested for driving under the influence in Thurston County. As part of a plea agreement, he was fined $350. For his commendable service as a gunner and assistant gunner from December 1998 to July 2001, Keyes was awarded an Army Achievement Medal. Following his honorable discharge, he relocated to Nia Bay, Washington, where he resided within the Makah Reservation community on the Olympic Peninsula. In 2007, Keyes embarked on a new venture, establishing a construction business in Alaska named Keyes Construction. Concurrently, he worked as a handyman, contractor, and construction laborer. When questioned about the timing of his murders, Keyes cryptically responded, "Yeah, Nia Bay's a boring town," leaving a lingering sense of mystery around his actions. Criminal history. Keyes meticulously planned his crimes, deliberately selecting random individuals across the United States to elude detection. He devoted months to plotting before carrying out each specific act. His preferred targets were often found in remote campgrounds and isolated locations where he could operate discreetly. Astonishingly, Keyes admitted to employing firearms only when absolutely necessary, favoring strangulation due to the disturbing pleasure he derived from watching his victims lose consciousness in the throes of struggle. In a bizarre twist, he asserted a peculiar moral code, claiming to spare children and parents of children from his sinister activities, motivated by his fear that his own daughter might uncover his dark deeds. However, law enforcement, including police and FBI investigators, remained skeptical of this assertion, harboring suspicions that Keyes had indeed taken the lives of numerous teenagers and children. During his 3-year stint in the United States Army, Keyes did not confess to any homicides. Yet, he did admit to 2 attempted sexual assaults against women, one involving a prostitute during a leave in Egypt, and the other with a college student he encountered in Israel. It is widely believed that he resumed his homicidal spree in 2001 following his discharge. Keyes had connections to New York, where he owned a 10-acre plot of land and a decrepit cabin in Constable. He also confessed to perpetrating bank robberies in both New York and Texas. The FBI later confirmed his involvement in the April 2009 robbery of a community bank branch in Tupper Lake, New York. Moreover, he disclosed his involvement in a Texas home burglary that culminated in arson. An FBI report documented Keyes' involvement in the burglary of 20 to 30 homes and several bank heists across the United States between 2001 and 2012. Shockingly, he is suspected of causing as many as 11 deaths within the United States and potentially even more victims beyond its borders. Keyes meticulously orchestrated his murders long in advance and employed extraordinary measures to evade detection. Unlike typical serial killers, he lacked a specific victim profile, preferring random targets. He consistently committed his crimes far from his home and never revisited the same location. During his murderous excursions, he meticulously ensured his mobile phone remained turned off and conducted transactions with cash. Remarkably, he had no discernible connection to any of his known victims. For instance, in the case of the Courier murders, Keyes flew to Chicago before renting a car to cover a 1,000-mile journey to Vermont, where he utilized a murder kit he had concealed 2 years prior to perpetrate the gruesome act. Possible victims Julie Marie Harris, a 13-year-old Special Olympics medalist in skiing, disappeared on March 2, 1996, while waiting for a ride to a local church in Colville, Washington. Her remains were found on April 26, 1997, in a wooded area a few miles away. A cause of death was not determined. Harris was a double amputee whose prosthetic feet were found by the Colville River a month after her disappearance. Keyes, then 18 years old, lived in the area at the time and was questioned about her case after he was arrested in 2012, but he neither confirmed nor denied killing her. Cassandra Cassie Emerson, 12, another young girl from the Colville, Washington area, was reported missing after the remains of her mother, Marlene K. Emerson, 29, were discovered in their burned-out trailer home on June 27, 1997. Cassie's remains were found in 1998, about 13 miles from her home. Keyes did admit that his first act of arson was with a trailer in Colville. Keyes openly confessed to investigators that he had taken the lives of 5 individuals within Washington state, triggering an ongoing inquiry led by both state police and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. During his admission, Keyes disclosed details about his actions, such as the possible disposal of one victim in a Nia Bay, Washington lake, sometime between July and October 2001. Regrettably, this particular death had been initially categorized as accidental. Additionally, Keyes admitted to the double homicide of a young couple between 2001 and 2005. According to his statements, the male victim had been brutally beaten to death, while the female had met her end through strangulation, with both victims being buried. Between 2005 and 2006, Keyes confessed to 2 more killings, each carried out separately. He indicated that one victim had been discarded in Lake Crescent, Washington. Although Keyes had no prior felony record in Washington, he had been stopped twice for minor driving-related offenses. Authorities launched a comprehensive review of unsolved murder and missing persons cases to ascertain any possible connections to Keyes' actions. In 2012, authorities identified a potential victim only known as Lewis County Jane Doe. This woman was discovered on April 7, 2011, in the Peterman Hill area in Morton, Washington, by a passing motorist. By 2022, her identity had been determined but not publicly disclosed. Keyes also admitted to at least one murder in New York State. In late 2012, Authorities had yet to ascertain the victim's identity, age, or gender, along with the time and location of the murder. Nonetheless, they regarded Keyes's confession as credible. Keyes is a person of interest in a series of crimes that occurred in 2007, committed by an individual known as the Boca Killer in the vicinity of Boca Raton, Florida. The initial incident in this string of murders involved the tragic case of Randy Ann Malitz Gorenberg, aged 52, who was forcibly taken from the parking lot of the Boca Town Center Mall on March 23, 2007. Shockingly, within an hour of her abduction, her life was tragically cut short by 2 fatal gunshot wounds, and her lifeless body was discarded at a separate location. The subsequent crime involved the abduction of an unidentified woman who claimed that on August 7, 2007, she and her young son were kidnapped from the very same shopping mall parking lot. Although the kidnapper had concealed their identity with a mask and sunglasses, the victim managed to catch fleeting glimpses of the perpetrator's face. She described the abductor as a tall, athletically built man with long hair, a description that generally aligned with Keyes' physical appearance. Fortunately, this woman was released unharmed after the assailant coerced her into withdrawing cash from an automated teller machine. The third Boca case was the murder of Nancy Bochicchio, 47 years old, and her 7-year-old daughter, Joey Bochicchio Hauser, who were found fatally shot in their vehicle at the Boca Town Center Mall parking lot on December 12, 2007. Authorities suspect that Keyes may have been responsible for the disappearance and presumed murder of 48-year-old Deborah Feldman, who had been involved in sex work and struggled with substance abuse. This suspicion arose when investigators discovered frequent searches for Feldman's missing persons case on Keyes's computer shortly before his arrest. Feldman was last seen at her apartment in Hackensack, New Jersey on April 8, 2009, and her body has never been recovered. Federal agents confronted Keyes with Feldman's image, and his response was telling. He hesitated and then reluctantly stated, "I don't want to talk about her yet." There is speculation that Keyes may have buried her near Tupper Lake, New York. On May 28, 2011, Madison Maddie Geraldine Scott disappeared during the early morning hours after attending a party at Hogsback Lake near Vanderhoof, British Columbia. Her remains were not found until May 2023. It's worth noting that Hogsback Lake is a 33-hour drive from Anchorage, Alaska, where Keyes resided at the time. Keyes was calculated in his victim selection, preferring those who would be least likely to be connected to him. He once mentioned, "I would let my victims come to me in some remote location." Keyes frequently traveled to Canada, and when asked if he had killed anyone there, he chillingly responded, "Canadians don't count." Keyes admitted to the murders of 49-year-old William Bill Scott Currier and 55-year-old Lorraine Simone Currier from Essex, Vermont. On the night of June 8, 2011, Keyes broke into their home, bound them, and transported them to an abandoned farmhouse. There, he shot Bill before subjecting Lorraine to sexual assault and strangulation. Their bodies remain undiscovered. 2 years prior, Keyes had concealed a murder kit, which he later employed near the Currier residence. After the murders, he relocated most of the kit's contents to a new hiding spot in Parishville, New York, where they remained until his arrest. Keyes's final confirmed victim was 18-year-old Samantha Tesla Koenig, who worked at a coffee booth in Anchorage, Alaska. On February 1, 2012, Keyes abducted Koenig from her workplace, stole her debit card and other belongings, sexually assaulted her, and ultimately took her life the following day. He left her body in a shed, then embarked on a prearranged 2-week cruise with his family in the Gulf of Mexico, only to return to Alaska later. There, he grotesquely altered Koenig's appearance, taking pictures of her with a 4-day-old edition of the Anchorage Daily News, making it appear as if she were still alive. Keyes demanded a $30,000 ransom, after which he dismembered Koenig's body and disposed of it in Matanuska Lake, north of Anchorage. Keyes is also a suspect in the disappearance of 58-year-old James Jimmy Lamar Tidwell, Jr., an electrician who went missing in Mount Enterprise, Texas on February 15, 2012. Tidwell was last seen at 5:30 a.m. that day after finishing his night shift. During a bank robbery in Azle, Texas, on February 16, 2012, the perpetrator, believed to be Keyes, wore a white hard hat similar to Tidwell's. Tidwell's hair also bore a resemblance to a dark-haired wig worn by Keyes during the robbery. When questioned, Keyes claimed that his wig was made of human hair but refused to provide further details, cryptically stating, "You don't have to buy real hair to get real hair." Investigation and arrest. Following the murder of Koenig, Keyes demanded a ransom, and law enforcement authorities were able to trace withdrawals from her account as he traversed the southwestern United States. During this period, there was controversy surrounding the police's decision not to release surveillance footage of Koenig's abduction. Keyes was apprehended in the parking lot of the Cotton Patch Cafe in Lufkin, Texas, on the morning of March 13, 2012, by Texas Highway Patrol Corporal Brian Henry and Texas Ranger Stephen Rayburn. Investigators had issued a lookout alert for the suspect's vehicle, which had been used to withdraw funds from Koenig's account at ATMs. Keyes's vehicle matched the description, and he was pulled over for driving slightly above the speed limit. During the stop, officers noticed currency stained with bright ink, indicating it may have come from a bank robbery. Subsequently, Koenig's ATM card and cell phone were discovered in Keyes's car. Keyes was later extradited to Alaska, where he confessed to the murder of Koenig. His legal representation was provided by Rich Kirtner, the federal public defender for Alaska. Keyes was indicted for his involvement in the case, and his trial was scheduled to commence in March 2013. While in custody, Keyes cooperated to some extent, admitting to certain crimes and expressing a desire to be executed within a year. He cited concerns about negative publicity affecting his young daughter as a reason for his cooperation, but significantly reduced his cooperation after his identity was exposed in the media. On May 23, 2012, during a routine hearing, Keyes attempted to escape. He used wood shavings from a pencil to pick the handcuffs, prompting U.S. Marshals to employ a taser to subdue him. Death, while being held in jail at the Anchorage Correctional Complex on suspicion of murder, Keyes managed to conceal a razor blade in his cell. He was not allowed razor blades, being under security restrictions of using an electric razor under supervision. He died by suicide on December 2, 2012, via cutting his wrists and attempted strangulation. A suicide note found under his body consisted of an ode to murder, but offered no clues about other possible victims. In 2020, the FBI released the drawings of 11 skulls and 1 pentagram, which had been drawn in blood and found underneath Keyes' jail cell bed after his suicide. One of the drawings included the phrase, "We are one," written at the bottom. The FBI believes the number of skulls correlates with what are believed to be the total number of his victims,